হ্যাঁ, নিরুপম স্যার, আপনি ক্লাস শুরু করতে পারেন। আর একজন একটু পরে সময় লাগবে, জয়েন করবে।
Okay, so good evening everyone and to before I begin with today's class, I would like to inform that I've already shared the transcripts and the comprehensive summaries of pre-recorded lectures on Indian economy with Samrat sir. So if you go through those transcripts of those lectures as well as their respective comprehensive summaries, that would be good for you. And they have been numbered lecture wise. That is lecture number 1, 2, 3, and so on till lecture number 37. In between, the comprehensive summaries as well as uh, the transcripts for lecture number 33 and lecture number 35 are not available, but that won't affect that much in the flow of the lecture transcripts which you can go through. Okay. Now, right now I'll be starting with microeconomics. So before we get into the discussion of microeconomics, we need to understand that why do we study economics? Because first and foremost, there is a tremendous amount of misconception. The misconception emanates because of the fact that people for a long time, including those who are from the economics profession, have indulged in nonsensical tea shop gossip. That means economics is about money, economics is about prices, economics is about inflation. So very big jargons have used in explaining the scope and the objective or the ambit of the economics as a discipline. But that is altogether a nonsensical tea shop gossip, which carries no sense and which actually creates unnecessary fear, unnecessary aspersions regarding this discipline. So first of all, we need to understand before we get into microeconomics, we need to understand that why do we study economics? It is that should be clear right at the outset. Now, if you see, if you want anything, whether you are living in a primitive society or whether you are living in an advanced society, which is basically a market-based society, you'll have to understand that we are all driven by our different types of needs and desires. That means even for basic sustenance, if we want to survive also, we need some bare minimum things without which we cannot survive. We need water, we need food. That means if we want to keep our body moving, if we want to have energy to sustain our life, we need these two things. Now, one thing we have to be very much sure that there are not just few needs, but there are multiple needs. Now, if you see, as the society becomes more and more complex, as our standard of living becomes higher and higher, our needs also becomes much more complex. So complexity leads to multiple needs and multiple requirements from a group of individuals, which when aggregated makes these desires too much complicated and too much complex to be comprehended so easily. Number one. Number two is this: the desires that we have, the human needs that are there, needs to be also supported with the resources that are available. As I say, that the desires are multiple and multifaceted and numerous. And when they're aggregated at a country level or let's say at a global level, we can find that there are billions or trillions, if not trillions, of such individual needs and requirements. But the resources that can be used to support or to fulfill those requirements are in limited amount. So what do we come first when we get into this realm or the domain of economics? The needs are infinite or the needs are numerous, whereas the resources are limited. That means, in short, the resources are scarce relative to the needs. When the resources are scarce relative to the needs, that means we will have to devise some sort of a mechanism or some sort of a signaling process that will prioritize the use of the scarce resources to meet the requirements in such a way such that the total benefit to the entire society is maximized. So when we talk about economics as a discipline and when we'll be getting as an offshoot of this discussion that is right into microeconomics, discipline of economics is nothing but to study about this to study about this innumerable or numerous human needs and desires, and how to allocate the scarce resources using different mechanisms so as to allocate these resources for meeting these various needs, but in such a way so that the total benefit of the welfare is maximized. Now, what is the immediate implication of this statement? The immediate implication of this statement is this, that there is no free lunch. Okay. Since the resources are scarce, but the needs are numerous or infinite, there is no free lunch. That means nothing is available for free. So whenever anything is not available for free, that means you are putting some sort of a requirement for the use or the allocation of such resources. So what is that mechanism that we use? Basically, the mechanism that we use basically is the price mechanism. That means we price all the resources, whether they're raw materials, whether they're intermediate goods, or whether they're finished products. Okay. So by devising, so this is basically something which has knowingly or unknowingly been devised since antiquity. That means the moment the human, as part of the society, started exchanging things amongst themselves, that was the de facto introduction of this price mechanism. So price mechanism is not necessarily based on any currency or any monetary unit. So whenever you are involved in any sort of exchange, that means you're exchanging certain goods amongst yourselves or certain services amongst yourselves between two or more individuals, it is obviously based on this price mechanism. So what is this price mechanism? Price mechanism is nothing but when you are exchanging something for the other. That is the basic of any price mechanism. So let's say if I need rice, while I have something much more than which I require. Let's say I have got wheat much more than I require, but I don't have rice. So I need rice for consumption. So how will I get it? I will enter into some sort of a transaction with another individual or a group of individuals, that means two or more individuals, who has got rice in plenty, but who doesn't have wheat in plenty for their consumption. So then we will enter into some sort of a transaction through bargaining process, whereby we will be fixing that how many units of rice will be exchanged against how many units of wheat and vice versa. So that means whenever I'm talking about price mechanism, it basically involves exchanging of goods and services amongst the parties who have got mutual needs. So moment you have got a mutual need, then only this exchange mechanism will be in force. Now, this mechanism, which is the most primitive price mechanism that we have seen since antiquity, is something which is known as the barter system. Barter system means wherever there is exchange of goods and services between two or more individuals. And these terms of exchange, that means how many units of good A will be exchanged against how many units of good B, changes from time to time depending on the relative scarcity or the relative plenty of the resources in question that are involved in the transaction or in the exchange process. Now, this is the most primitive form of price mechanism. Now, the problem with this most primitive form of price mechanism was this, that we need to have that we need to have this mutual requirement. That means there should be double coincidence of wants. Now, if this mutual requirement doesn't exist, that means I would like to have rice, but I've got wheat in plenty. So another person who has got wheat in plenty, who has got rice in plenty, but doesn't have wheat, but doesn't have any requirement of wheat, so that person cannot enter, or I cannot enter into any sort of transaction with that person. That means, moment I am using this primitive form of price mechanism to satisfy my requirements and wants, and moment this double coincidence of want doesn't exist, then there cannot be any sort of transaction. But as I've said that this price mechanism has been devised. This price mechanism has been devised to facilitate the allocation of the resources in a way that maximizes the benefit to the society in aggregate. Then how did we deal with this problem of double coincidence of ones? This is for the first time when we came with the concept of currency. So this currency, whether it is in the form of a coin, whether it is in the form of cowrie shells, whether it is in the form of paper bills or currency bills, this was then devised to carry over or to smooth or streamline the price mechanism to work effectively for the purpose of exchange of goods and services, even if when there was no double coincidence of wants. So, moving from the most antique form of price mechanism, that is the barter system, to its much more advanced form, where we devise this monetary or the currency unit, we were able to advance, or we were able to streamline this price mechanism to act effectively as a tool or as an system for allocating resources accordingly in the most efficient manner. Now the question is this, that whether it is the barter system or whether it is the currency system or the monetary system that we use to allocate the resources or to express the value of any resources that are involved in the transaction process or in the exchange process, how do we determine the price? Because even in case of the barter system, we had determined how many units of rice can be exchanged against how many units of wheat and vice versa. Now we have substituted that with how many units of monetary currency unit needs to be exchanged against, let's say, a particular amount of rice, let's say 1 kilo of rice. Now, how do we determine this? So this is where the market mechanism or the dynamics of the market needs to be explored. So how to begin with regarding this market? So market, the understanding which we have got, and again it has to do thanks to this nonsensical tea shop gossip, is this that it is like a brick and mortar structure. But you know that today market is not a brick and mortar structure, because we have also got a market which is online. That means which is in a virtual form. So essentially, market is some sort of an institution, or rather I should say it is some sort of an interface that facilitates the transaction between two or more parties. So when we consider any market for any commodity or any service, whether it is in a physical form or whether it is in a virtual form, whether it is a digital platform or whether it is a brick and mortar structure, it involves basically two stakeholders, the consumers, that is the buyers, as well as the producers, that is the sellers. Now, what is the objective of any consumer? Objective of any consumer is to maximize his or her satisfaction. Okay? Then the counterparty or the other stakeholder, what is the objective of the producer? The objective of the producer is to maximize his or her profit. So both the parties are there to maximize or to optimize their objectives. Now they interact with each other. Now basically what is happening, you can see very clearly, now we have made a clear distinction compared to the barter system. In case of a barter system, it was necessary that both the parties who are involved in any sort of transaction have to be a producer of some commodity, at least some commodity in question. But now when we consider the market system that we are now discussing about, with the introduction of the currency or the monetary unit, it is not necessary that the parties that enter into any sort of transaction in the market have to be producers compulsorily. So if I consider the consumers, the present day consumers, it is usually the case that they don't produce anything, they only consume the things. And similarly, when we consider the producers, when they're entering into any sort of transaction, usually they are mostly the producers or the sellers, and they are not consuming usually. I'm not saying that it is always the case, but usually. So what happens? These two parties interact with each other. So they decide about the price. That means what should be the terms of trade, what should be the terms of exchange. That means for 1 kilo or for 1 unit of the commodity that is being sold or that is being exchanged with the consumer, what price is the consumer supposed to pay back in question? So this is how the bargaining process is initiated and continues between the consumer as well as the producer till they come to a settlement. Now, moment they come to a settlement, then we term that the market has now reached an equilibrium. So equilibrium is nothing but a condition, or it is nothing but a situation when both the consumers as well as the producers have agreed to carry have agreed to carry out the transaction. So that means they are now agreed upon the price which they will be receiving or which they will be paying. And similarly, they have also agreed upon the quantity which they will be supplying or which they will be buying. So this price in question at the point of equilibrium is something known as the equilibrium price. And the quantity in question at the equilibrium, which is being sold or being bought, is known as the equilibrium quantity. So equilibrium condition in any market is nothing but an understanding reached mutually reached mutually as well as voluntarily by the consumers and the producers. So this is the usual situation. Now there can be a lot of there are a lot of exceptions about this equilibrium position, depending on the market, depending on the commodity, depending on different types of legal requirements that we discuss. But in its most simple, in its most fundamental form, this is how we understand an equilibrium concept with respect to the market in economics. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Okay, moving further. Now, how do we reach this equilibrium point? Remember, what did I say? I said that there are two parties or two stakeholders rather who are entering into any sort of transaction in at any marketplace. The consumer as well as the producer. Now, the consumer, as I said, is there to maximize his or her utility or satisfaction. The producer is there to maximize his or her profit in question. Now, how does the consumer interact or enter into any sort of bargaining in question, bargaining with the producer in question? So, this is how the transaction happens. So, what will the consumer do? The consumer will come along with a schedule which is known as the demand schedule. So what is this demand schedule? The demand schedule is nothing but it's a list. So where two things are being stated, that is the price and the quantity demanded. So that demand schedule will state that if the price is, let's say, X, then what will be the quantity demanded? Similarly, if the price is Y, then what will be the quantity demanded, and so on by the consumer. And the consumer then hands over the schedule to the producer. Likewise, the producer also comes along with a schedule which is known as the supply schedule. So what is the supply schedule? Again, just like the demand schedule, it also contains information on two variables. So one variable is the price of the commodity in question, and the second variable is the quantity supplied of the commodity in question. So the producer is stating that if the price is X, then this is the quantity I will be supplying. If the price is Y, this is the quantity I will be supplying in the market. And they exchange the schedule with one another in order to facilitate the bargaining process in the market. Now the question is this. Now the next question that will be arising, how does the quantity demanded change with the price of the commodity in question? And similarly, how the quantity supplied change with the price of the commodity in question? So when we talk about this thing, definitely we'll now have to think about the psychological aspect of the consumer as well as that of the producer in question. So if you have bought anything, if you have accompanied your parents to any physical marketplace, if you have bought anything on your own from any digital marketing platform, you will come across this typical behavior with respect to the consumer to begin with. Since you are a consumer, since you are buying something, so this is something which will be striking right at the beginning. So what is happening? If I consider the price of the commodity in question, so when I consider the price of the commodity in question that I'm going to change over a certain span of time, I will keep certain things unchanged or constant. So what are those things that will keep unchanged or constant? Obviously, the resources that I am using to buy anything or to purchase anything, which is obviously my income. Okay. Second thing that I'm going to keep constant is my choices. That means my choices are not going to change at the point of at that point of time whenever I'm buying something. So whenever I'm buying something, I'm considering that my choice, or rather my preferences, remain unchanged. What are the other things that I'm considering to remain unchanged? Obviously, the price of the other commodities. That means if I'm buying, let's say, milk, I'll consider the price of sugar, the price of tea, the price of coffee, let's say the price of the biscuits, they remain unchanged. Okay. Now, keeping these things, that means the things which are not related, which are not actually the price of the commodity. Let's say if I'm considering the commodity in question to be milk. So these are the factors which I've just mentioned, which will be kept constant or which will be kept unchanged while I change the price of the commodity in question, which I'm intending to buy. So keeping these things, now I'm going to define something which is known as the law of demand. So what is this law of demand? Law of demand is stated something like this. Everything else remaining constant. Just now we have discussed what we are going to keep constant or unchanged. Everything else remaining constant, if the price of the commodity in question rises, the quantity demanded of that commodity in question falls, and vice versa. That means whenever I visit a market and I find that the price of the commodity is very high, I will demand less of that commodity. But whenever the price of that same commodity begins to drop, I will demand more of that commodity. This is an usual and this is a normal consumer behavior. Now, based on this consumer behavior, which has been observed over a period of time, this law of demand has been framed, or rather, it has been stated. Everything else remaining constant, an increase in the price of that commodity leads to decrease in the quantity demanded of that commodity, and vice versa. Okay. Any questions, anyone? Okay. Moving on to the producer side. Now, when we move on to the producer side, similar thing also confronts the producer. So, what is the producer now going to change? The producer is now going to change the price of the commodity in question. But now here also we need to keep certain things constant or unchanged while we are changing the price of the commodity to see how the producer will behave or how the quantity supplied will change. So what are the things we are going to keep constant from the producer side? Obviously, the working capital of the producer. So whatever budget, production budget the producer has got, or the working capital the producer has got, it remains unchanged. Number one. Number two, whenever producer is producing something, he requires certain raw materials to produce that commodity. That means there is also price of the raw materials, or rather the prices of the raw materials which the producer uses to produce that commodity. That means in this case, another thing which we will be keeping unchanged or constant are the prices of the raw materials that are involved in the production of that commodity. Okay. What else will be kept unchanged or constant? The way the producer is producing that commodity. That means we are talking about the production technology, the capital machinery, equipment, the processes that are involved. So that process or the any machinery or any equipment that are involved in the process, and hence the production technology will be kept constant. Okay. So these are the major parameters or the variables which will be kept constant while we observe how the producer behaves, which as the price of that commodity changes. So this will now lead us to the law of supply. So the law of supply will now be stated as follows. Everything else remain constant, which we have just seen and which I've just mentioned. Everything else remaining constant, an increase in the price of that commodity will lead to increase in the quantity supplied of that commodity, and vice versa. So whenever I'm increasing the price of that commodity, the producer will supply more of that commodity, and vice versa. Okay. So we now know what is law of supply. We now know what is the law of demand. Right now, as I discuss these on an online platform, it is right now I'm not referring to how will this will look graphically or visually, but now as you can see that there is a negative relation when we consider the law of demand. There is a negative relation between the price of the commodity and the quantity demanded of that commodity. On the other hand, when we consider the law of supply, there is a positive relation between the price of the commodity and the quantity supplied of that commodity. Okay, so in case of consumer behavior, sorry, in case of demand schedule, which I have just mentioned while discussing about this bargaining of the transaction process between the consumer and the producer, when we consider the demand schedule, we'll see that there is a negative relation between the price of that commodity and the quantity demanded. On the other hand, when we consider the supply schedule, we'll see that there's a positive relation between the price of that commodity and the quantity supply. That means whenever there is a bargaining, the bargaining will be done or the understanding will be reached in such a way that at the point of settlement or at the point of equilibrium, the producer will be maximizing his or her profit, and similarly, the consumer will be maximizing his or her utility. So, moment these two objectives, that is, utility maximization of the consumer and the profit maximization of the producer, are satisfied, that means there is no incentive either for the consumer to look for some other point of settlement, and similarly for the producer to look for some other point of the settlement. This equilibrium will remain unchanged. That means this equilibrium will be something, or this settlement will be something which will consider to be stable. So these are the basic facts of the equilibrium, which we will be studying on and off when we discuss about the consumer behavior as well as the producer behavior in much more greater details. Okay. Now coming to the consumer behavior. When we talk about the consumer, as I say that the consumer is trying to maximize his or her utility. That means based on his or her choices or preferences, he or she wants to maximize his or her satisfaction. Now, the basic question which we need to encounter is this: how will you measure satisfaction, or how will you measure utility? What is the way that you can measure satisfaction and utility? This is the basic question which we need to explore and answer. So, what do you think? How do you measure satisfaction or utility? How do you measure satisfaction or utility? So, if you're buying something, if you're desiring something, if you need something, that means you're desiring it or you need it to satisfy your utility or satisfaction. To meet your requirement, which will lead to satisfaction or which will lead to some sort of utility for you. So the question is this: how do you measure that utility or satisfaction? What are the ways of measuring that utility or satisfaction? Any idea, students? How do you measure it? Any idea, students? How do you measure this?
Satisfaction level.
Yes, but how do you measure it? You can measure profit in terms of money, that this is the profit reached, but how do you measure satisfaction or utility? Or rather, I should put it, what is the definitive way of measuring utility or satisfaction of a consumer, or of a typical consumer? How do you do it?
So level
Any
of
idea?
happiness.
Level up? Yes,
Happiness.
Rudra, level up? What?
Happiness.
And how do you measure happiness? What is the metric, or what is the unit of measuring happiness? Think. Any unit you have got of measuring happiness? You're right. You measure satisfaction and utility in terms of happiness, but how do you measure happiness? In what unit do you measure happiness? in fact, there is no definitive way of measuring happiness. That's why when we are talking about maximizing utility or maximizing satisfaction from the point of view of a consumer, it is at best subjective in nature. Because first of all, we don't have any unit of measuring it, number one. Secondly, the assessment of any happiness, any satisfaction, any utility for any typical consumer is representative, is subjective at best. Because it is altogether a psychological, you can say, phenomenon. It is altogether psychological phenomenon. It is not something which you can view or which you can visualize. If you're using any sort of viewing or any sort of instrument that you can use, it is not possible to capture or to observe physically in some form or the other. That means this concept of happiness, which is reflecting your level of satisfaction and utility, is at best abstract in nature. And something which is abstract in nature, which cannot be measured in a definitive manner, is something which is at best subjective. That means whenever we are considering about measuring consumer utility or satisfaction, it is at best subjective, and hence one needs to be careful, or one needs to be, I'll not say skeptical, but one needs to be cautious about putting any definitive value to your level of utility, happiness, satisfaction, whatever it may be. But it is not so when we consider the way to measure the profit of a producer, because you can measure it in an objective fashion. You can measure it in terms of what? You can measure it in terms of the currency unit. So this is the profit is in this amount of rupees or this amount of any currency that we may consider for our discussion. But similar thing is not possible in case of consumer satisfaction utility. What we can say definitively? We can say definitively that the consumer utility is more in this case rather than in the other case. Or the consumer happiness or satisfaction is more in this case rather than in the other case. But we cannot say by how much it is more, whether it is more by 40%, whether it is more by 50%, or whether it is more than double. We cannot make any such definitive statement. What we can state? We can state that this amount of commodity in question gives the consumer more satisfaction than another amount of another amount of the same commodity in question. Okay, that means we can say that this amount is giving me more satisfaction than the other amount, but by how much we cannot say. So we can have some sort of a concept which we term as ordinal utility. So what is this concept of ordinal utility? Ordinal utility is only giving you the idea whether this amount of commodity gives you more satisfaction than the other amount of that same commodity in question, or two or more commodities in question. So it is just ordering the commodity in terms of the amount of that commodity in question. It is just ordering which is giving you more happiness, which is giving you lesser happiness. That means it is giving you some sort of a ranking. Rank 1, rank 2, rank 3, and so on. So rank 1 is giving you the highest satisfaction utility. Rank 2 is giving you satisfaction lower than that corresponding to rank 1, and so on. But you cannot say what is the gap between rank 1 and rank 2. Okay. But when we consider the situation or the condition of the producer in question, we can say definitively that this commodity fetches this amount of profit more than the other amount of that same commodity. That you can measure. Clearly, you can measure the difference in monetary terms and in a definitive manner, in a much more objective, in a much more definitive manner. So this is the basic difference when we try to assess the optimum or the maximal position of the consumer vis-a-vis that of the producer in terms of the definitiveness of that measurement or assessment of the consumer or the producer position. In case of consumer, it is always subjective. In case of producer, it is objective. Only thing we can say in case of consumer, we can order or we can rank the commodity or the bundles of commodities in question, but we cannot definitively make any statement by how much is one commodity, amount of one commodity or commodity bundle. That means two or more commodities. One particular bundle or one particular set is giving how much more satisfaction than the other commodity set in question. That we cannot say. So whenever we are discussing about consumer producer behavior, understand this thing very clearly. There is no meaning if you see that when we are giving some value to any level of consumer satisfaction, that has got no any definitive meaning. Only thing is this, we are just using some proxies to state the rank or to state the order of that commodity amount or that commodity bundle in question. There is no other definitive implication or meaning of that value beyond this in question. Let's say we say commodity 1, what is the total utility equal to 100. But instead of 100, we can also write it as 50. We can also write it as 200. What we have to ensure? We have to ensure that moment we are putting the number against any commodity bundle in question, and let's say that commodity bundle in question is rank number 1. So the number that we are assigning will be the highest number, whether it is 50, whether it is 100, whether it is 200. So the numbers which are being received by the lower ranked commodity bundles or the commodity amount should always be less than the number that we are giving to the rank 1 commodity bundle or rank 1 commodity amount. That's the only thing we need to ensure. So it carries no meaning. Let's say there are two commodity bundles in question, rank 1, rank 2. So rank 1 we give number 100, rank 2 we give number 50. Okay. Now, instead of giving rank 100 and rank 250, if we give, let's say, rank 1 200, okay, and we give rank 2, let's say, 75. So, obviously, 200 is greater than 75. That means we are maintaining that order or the rank unchanged. As is the situation when we put 100 to rank 1 and 50 to rank 2. Again, in that case, also 100 is greater than 50. That means we are maintaining that order of ranking. So in the first case, when I gave rank 1 200 and rank 2 80, the gap was how much? 200 minus 80, 120. Now when I give rank 100 and rank 2 50, what is the difference? It is 50. Okay. So you see, when I'm using two different sets of numbers for these two ranks, in first case the difference is 120, in second case the difference is 50. So will you say that the consumer satisfaction has been changed? No, the consumer satisfaction is not been changed. So what is the fact? The fact is this: consumer is deriving more satisfaction or utility from rank 1 commodity bundle rather than from rank 2 commodity. That means the order of the ranking has been maintained, whether we are using two different sets of numbers in these two cases. That's the only thing which carries meaning when we give any sort of number to any to express to proxy for any level of satisfaction utility against any consumption bundle or consumption quantity of any commodity in question. We have to ensure that we are providing the number against any commodity bundle or against any commodity amount in such a way that this ranking order is maintained in any situation. Okay. Any questions, anyone, before I move further? Okay, you don't have any question. Fine. So now you understand that how we define the situation of a consumer to begin with and that of a producer to begin with when they're interacting with each other to satisfy or to maximize their objectives at any marketplace. Now, obviously, you can understand that discussing this in English at times may be much more involving. So what we'll be requiring? We'll be requiring some sort of a visual representation. Okay, we'll be requiring some sort of a visual representation which will facilitate or which will at times make our understanding of the market situation that involves the consumer as well as the producer much more easier and much more convenient. So in order to do that, what I'll be doing, I'll be suggesting the soft copy of that book. I'll be sharing with Somnath sir, who will be then, and sir will be then sharing the same with you. So in the next class, what I'll be doing, I'll be asking you to, through Somnath sir only, I'll be asking you to come prepared. That means attending the next class after going through certain sections of that book or certain chapters of that book. So once you are accustomed to those chapters or to those sections of the book that contains those diagrams, it will be much more easier for you as well as for me to facilitate the discussion further in the next classes. So in order to do that, I'll be sending the soft copy of that book with Somnath sir. I'll also be mentioning Somnath sir which chapters or which sections of that book you need to go through before you come for the next class, which tentatively will be next Friday. Okay. Any questions, anyone?
No, sir.
Okay. So I'm concluding here today because without any diagrammatic reference, it will not be feasible further to continue this discussion on microeconomics. So I'll be doing the needful, and it will be a sincere request because that will make things easier for both the sides, for you as well as for me. It will be expected, and it is a sincere request that you will go through the sections or chapters before you attend the class. Otherwise, it won't make any sense for you also. Okay. So that's it for today's class. So thank you everyone, and good night.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.